Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
But with the importance of secret intelligence being debated in Parliament this week, we sent Jane Moore undercover and underground. This is her roundup of the political week.
Welcome, James. It's been a long time.
It's Jane, actually.
And finally, here we are.
Spies, intelligence, and deadly weapons. Not just the new Bond film Spectre, it's been a dramatic week in Westminster too. The week got off to a tragic start when a Russian jet crashed in Egypt, killing all on board. Based on intelligence briefings, David Cameron says it's increasingly likely that a bomb may have caused the crash. So the Prime Minister suspended all flights to and from Sharm el-Sheikh, leaving thousands of Brits stranded.
If that Russian airliner was brought down by a terrorist bomb, that does have very real implications, and it means it's absolutely essential that we see that improvement of security at Sharm el-Sheikh airport.
All of this comes as the controversial Egyptian president is visiting the UK. It's hard to think of a more awkward time for him to be here. And he didn't exactly get a warm reception outside Downing Street. Islamic State affiliates claim they were behind the crash, and David Cameron still wants permission from Parliament to bomb IS targets in Syria. But the government was dealt a blow this week when the Foreign Affairs Committee urged not to press ahead with a vote on UK airstrikes.
We take the fight to ISIS wherever we can. British pilots are doing that in the skies above Iraq. If we were to do that in the skies above Syria, we need a vote in the House of Commons. But we're not going to go to the House of Commons unless we would be clear that we would win that vote and there would be a consensus for that action.
There is a consensus on wanting support for the victims of this war. I don't think there's a consensus around taking further military action.
You've got a secret. Something you can't tell anyone.
Don't worry, James, we've all got secrets we'd rather forget. But it's going to be harder to actually keep secrets from the state under potential Bond villain Theresa May's extended new snooping powers.
This new legislation will underpin the work of law enforcement and the security and intelligence agencies for years to come. It is their licence to operate.
Meanwhile, it's licensed to confuse when it comes to Labour's position on Trident. Scottish Labour voted overwhelmingly to scrap the nuclear missile system, but the UK party policy remains to support it, even though leader Jeremy Corbyn is dead against. The policy seems to be live and let die.
You're a kite dancing in a hurricane, Mr. Bond.
Former 00 agent Neil Kinnock came out of the shadows to warn that British voters will not back a party in favour of unilateral disarmament. You could say the writing's on the wall. Junior doctors were shaken and stirred this week. So much so that Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt wrote to them in a bid to prevent industrial action over pay and conditions. Thank you. We know from the coalition years just how quickly the NHS can become a toxic problem for the government, and they certainly don't want a repeat prescription.
We've actually been wanting to negotiate with the BMA since June, but they have refused to sit around the table with us. Instead, they've proceeded to ballot for industrial action.
You know, all this this speculation about this possibly being Daniel Craig's last outing as Bond has set me thinking. I think the world is ready for a female 007. The name's Bond. Jane Bond.
And from the vaults under Waterloo to our own little vaults here in the heart of Westminster, we're joined by Miranda. Welcome back. Alan, I would think it'd be interesting as a former Home Secretary to get your take on this. For the Prime Minister of the British government unilaterally to decide to stop these flights, the intelligence must have been pretty strong.
I would have thought so. I mean, you know, they have to bring anywhere between 12,000 and 20,000 Brits home. So they have to go through the very difficult logistics of getting planes out there to bring them back. You don't take a decision like that lightly. Indeed, even at the height of the problems in Egypt back in 2011, it didn't affect any of that tourist trade. And I think they also must have had a mind to how the impact on the tourist trade in Egypt, which will be profound. So I would have thought they had some very clear intelligence. And looking at some of those photographs of the wreckage where it looks like shrapnel and it looks like a bomb, but they wouldn't have just done it sitting around Cobra looking at photographs. They'd have had some intelligence.
Yeah, certainly I agree, because clearly it has dealt a blow to our relations with Egypt. It is a dramatic action to take. It has been unilateral. It's exposed us to questions and to ridicule. So I think it must have been very strong evidence. And I read in newspapers that the United States is also of the view that it was a bomb. I mean, obviously, it's a further leap of logic to say that, okay, it was a bomb, and therefore we must doubt the security at Sharm el-Sheikh. I mean, I suppose we would have been rather angry if after Lockerbie, other countries had said that, you know, none of their planes could fly to London. So, you know, diplomatically, it's a very, very powerful thing indeed. But as I said a moment ago, you know, if a government believes that it might lose British lives because it neglected to take action, you just can't take that risk.
And some commentators were saying, oh, it's terribly embarrassing because the president of Egypt was on the plane on the way here while this decision was taken. But actually, I think that's quite juvenile. There's no better time for the British Prime Minister and the Egyptian president to talk than now when these things are going on. It is also brought into the public limelight. There is a major Islamist insurgency going on in the Sinai Desert, a really major one, with total close links with the Islamists in Syria and Iraq. We should be talking now.
Well, absolutely. And actually, the context of this jet coming down puts those conversations which argue that the UK should cut off relations from Egypt, or sort of, you know, put Sisi in the deep freeze because he's should be an unwelcome character in London.
Because the human rights record is appalling.
The human rights record is appalling. But, you know, Egypt is an incredibly important, significant country. You know, the border with Libya. It's very, very important to be talking to Egypt right now for the reasons that are all too obvious with this plane coming down.
I mean, Jeremy Corbyn said that the Sisi visit, quote, threatens our national security. That can't be right, can it?
No. I didn't know he'd said that. No, I wouldn't have thought so. The CC visit. I mean, there were actually demonstrations down in Downing Street for and against, but
which
is fine. As
should be. There should be
history of democracy.
But as a country like Britain, which include Germany, France, the United States, bad as Mr. Sisi's human rights record is, you have to deal with Egypt. It's the most important country in the Arab world.
Of course you do. And if we turned our back on Egypt because we felt there was something wrong with Sisi's eventual election, there were issues about the Muslim Brotherhood, that would be a catastrophic mistake for British foreign policy.
Well, we're picking up on a catastrophic error of the past. Remember, we connived in the deposing of Mubarak. We got the Muslim Brotherhood. We didn't like that. So we, acquiesced in the replacement of the Muslim Brotherhood with Sisi. So, our interventions in the area are generally counterproductive and certainly against our own interests. So at least at the moment, we're dealing with Sisi.
Of course, what Sisi has been able to do, I mean, I think he I mean, there was effectively a military coup against the Muslim Brotherhood. He's put a lot of people in jail. I was speaking to Tim Marshall in the Daily Politics today, former distinguished foreign correspondent for Sky News. He was saying it's really back to Mubarak, it's back to Nasser in that stand. It's a very restrictive regime once more. But of course, this insurgency in the Sinai gives him a good excuse to go to be as tough as he wants.
Well, it does, but, you know, as with the conversations we were having during the Chinese premier's visit, you know, there's a big question about how you know, what used to be called in the early New Labour years ethical foreign policy. Does that mean you just shouldn't engage with any regime with a questionable human rights
threshold? We'd be talking to ourselves in Switzerland.
Well, exactly, exactly. And actually, you know, there are question marks about, you know, the UK's role in the world. Have we just gone off intervention forever? Or do we still have a role to play diplomatically? And if we have any sort of role to play, we have to engage.
Sisi represents a rather unpleasant regime that is rather successful at suppressing terrorism. The Middle East was covered in such unpleasant regimes that were rather good at suppressing terrorism, and we've connived in deposing quite a number of them.
Alan, do you agree with me that the reason why we haven't had a vote on Syrian intervention in the Commons is because Mr. Cameron, well, let me put it that way, we would have had one if he thought there was he could secure a majority, and he hasn't because he's not sure.
I'm puzzled by this. The front page of the Times said that he didn't have enough Labour MPs into. Well, I'm a Labour MP. No one's spoken to me about this. You know, Mr. Cameron hasn't been in the tea room talking to Labour MPs. But then Crispin Blunt, who's the Conservative chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, then that was said to be the reason because of their report.
The Foreign Affairs Committee was hostile to extending the bombing to Syria.
Yeah, so it seemed to me like a bit of a spin operation to suggest that it was Labour MPs. I mean, actually, Joe Cox, very brave, the new MP for Batley and Spleen, did a very good joint article with Andrew Mitchell a couple of weeks ago, and the debate was going on within the Labour Party. Hilary Benn has said, look, it depends on the circumstances, we're not ruling it out. So I think, you know, he's had got his fingers burnt back in August.
Which everybody tells me still jars with him.
I can imagine.
That was a searing experience.
But pretty amateur hour operation.
He's now in a difficulty because he can't afford to lose a second time. That could be dangerous for his job prospects if he loses. But the Tory whips
humiliating.
The Tory whips can tell him how many Tory rebels there would be. Yeah. The Tory whips can't tell them, though. They can't tell them how many Labour people are going to counteract the Tory rebels. It's a difficult place to be in.
It's a very difficult place to be in, but also there's the overall question of, but both the mood of the country. You know, intervention is extremely out of fashion here now, and also, quite frankly, every time we discuss this subject, the situation on the ground in Syria changes.
Because we've had the Russian intervention,
which was completely a surprise to everyone.
And just briefly, because I want to ask Alan about
what would the motion be? You know, what would the motion on which you're voting be?
Quick word, Michael.
The Select Committee report is important because it makes it much easier for Conservative rebels to rebel, much more difficult for Labour rebels to rebel.
Alan, what's the significance of Scottish Labour's vote against Trident?
It doesn't change Labour Party position. Labour Party position is decided by our National Policy Forum. It was endorsed as recently as the latest conference. Our policy, we were the government when the British nuclear weapon was introduced by the Attlee government. We were in power when we began this process of renewing Trident in 2007. It was an overwhelming vote then. It was an overwhelming vote 2 years ago when we had the next stage, and the policy of the Labour Party is very clear. We haven't devolved our policy to
But you say it's clear, except that the Scottish Labour Party is against Trident, but the leader of the Labour Party in Scotland is in favour of it. And if I can call it, quotes, the English Labour Party is in favour of Trident, but your leader is against it.
You made that very clear. I thought you made that very clear. Well, the Labour Party, we have conferences in Scotland and Wales, and Scottish Labour in particular want to have a kind of separate identity, so they had the debate, whereas we didn't have it at national conference. But they know that decision in Scotland does not override the national conference, which has decided in favour of Trident.
Not totally clear, though, if Labour will go into the next election backing Trident?
Well, no, that's right.
Yeah,
and
before then.
also, like almost everything else that happens in politics at the moment, another advantage to the SNP, because, you know, the Labour Party voted with the SNP in Holyrood on this.
Okay.
And it allows the SNP to say that Labour's all over the place.
Well, I'm not sure if the SNP want to get rid of, want unilateral nuclear design, whether they just don't want nuclear weapons in Scotland, because they're signed up to NATO. They would be protected by French nuclear weapons.
But the SNP doesn't have the union problem that you have, right? Because the unions want
Well, that's
Trident
the
because they want
problem.
the jobs.
Unite abstained, otherwise we'd have won the vote in Scotland.
I've been getting away